All right, welcome everyone to ANTICONQUISTA alongside the Qiao Collective and the GERG, working together collaboratively to bring this event about Chinese solidarity with Latin America. Today we're joined with two guests, Maria and Marco, two experts, I want to say, on Latin American solidarity with China. Um, and today, we're going to mostly talk about this issue from a context of how these relationships have helped build and establish positive benefits for Latin America in the face of a global imperialist threat, that threat of U.S. And Western imperialism. But before we start, I want to give a shout out to the GERG, which stands for the Geopolitical Economic Research Group, and all of the students who've been engaged with putting together this event behind the scenes, who are involved with watching it right now. Shout out to them for getting us together, for getting us started, and putting together this event. So thank you for that. So first, we're going to start with the topic of Chinese and Latin American solidarity and how these relations are important today and in these issues. We wouldn't be talking about the importance of this relationship had it not been for U.S. and Western imperialism, which has forced the strengthening of relations between the Chinese nation and Latin American ones. Where the U.S. has exploited and stolen, China is attempting to rebuild and aid. There is no doubt that a handful of criticisms can be made about China, just as criticisms can be made about any government in any country anywhere in the world. But we are not here today to attack a nation. We're not here today to criticize people who are under constant criticism, under constant attack, day in and day out, by the imperialist media and by the imperialist governments. To do so would not only be unprincipled, but it would also be untimely, especially given the rise in anti-Asian sentiment, hatred, and violence, particularly here in the United States, that we've seen recently. So jumping right into the program, we want to start with some basic definitions to get everyone on the same foundation, on the same level. So, we're all at the same eye level right now. So first, we're going to start off with what is imperialism and what is settler colonialism, their links and their connections. I'll start off giving some brief and basic definitions. Let me share my screen real quick. So starting off with what is imperialism, we define imperialism as, at Anticonquista, we define imperialism as the process whereby the dominant political economic interest of one nation expropriate for the enrichment of the whole nation/empire, land, labor, raw materials, and markets of another people. What this can be described as the exploitation of one country against another country, right? As for settler colonialism, or before we get to settler colonialism, we want to understand imperialism as the permanent stage of capitalism, not just the highest stage of capitalism. Imperialism existed before capitalism, existed since the Roman times. It existed in the process of what Marx calls primitive accumulation, that process of colonization, that process of the Atlantic slave trade. That was imperialist. That was the extraction of values and resources from one region to the Western European nations and the United States in order to build up the initial capital to build capitalism, right? So that's why we understand imperialism as the permanent stage of capitalism. It has always been there. What do we think of settler colonialism? We define settler colonialism as the replacement of the indigenous populations with a settler population. This population is meant to stay. This population goes and settles other regions, not that they are not native to, and intends to stay there and populate that region, right? This process involves genocide and involves the theft of land, of resources, and of labor. And this translates into wealth, both wealth currently at the time that these settlers were invading and generational wealth, which will follow down the line. So these are some basic definitions that we at Anticonquista like to lay out. We'll pass it on to our panelists. First, I want to start with Maria. What her thoughts on imperialism, settler colonialism, and how this relates to the global South, or even here in the diaspora. I think you're muted, Maria.
Okay. Latin America is a region that is very well acquainted with imperialism because our indigenous peoples were almost wiped out by the empire of Spain. and in Portugal, in Brazil. The Spanish were particularly violent and vile people who arrived. These were not very nice, gentle guys, even though they traveled with a priest. These were adventurers. These were men who, what they wanted was rapiña. They wanted to find the gold of the El Dorado, right? And they didn't care who they killed or what they did in order to get it. All you have to do is look at the beautiful murals in Mexico City by Diego Rivera, and there we all see the history of the horrible conquista of the Spanish. Now, this went on for several centuries, and in the 1800s, Simón Bolívar, who was Venezuelan born in Caracas, he with the Patriot Army, after many, many ups and downs, was the Latin American liberador, because liberator. He liberated 5 countries, 6 if you count Panama. And so we in Venezuela believe that we are liberators. We have never gone to war. Venezuela has never gone to war, except left its territory to liberate the brother nations there. So that imperialism was quite terrible. It went on for centuries, and we managed to overthrow it. So now we have a different imperialism, the imperialism of this savage capitalism, as Hugo Chavez used to call it. Capitalism goes through several, stages, and this stage of corporate capitalism is particularly savage. And what it has done is, although we are independent nations, politically written down in law, our sovereignty is very much at stake because of the imperialism, the economic imperialism of the United States and the powerful countries of Europe. So we are very much aware of what this imperialism has done. There has been no reformer, no person of progressive ideas in Latin America that has been approved or backed by the United States. Indeed, every single one of the dictators in Latin America has been backed to the hilt by the United States of America, who, under the supposed Monroe Doctrine, believe that we are their backyard. This is what President Chavez and now President Maduro, and of course, the wonderful Fidel Castro, have all called out the name of what it is. This is oppression. This is imperialism. This is an assault to the sovereignty of our nations. And right now, the country that is in the bullseye of the empire is Venezuela. And I want to say to you, it isn't just Venezuela. With Venezuela, Latin America will either rise or fall disastrously. In the 1930s, there was a republic in Spain. And when it was assaulted by the vicious fascist forces of Franco, who fought a war, a horrible civil war against the Republic of Spain, the European nations did not back the Republic. And they allowed the fascist forces of Franco, united with the Nazis, to destroy the Spanish Republic. If they had stuck to their principles and backed the legal, legitimate republic, there may not have been a Second World War, because this emboldened the Nazis and thought, oh, these people are weak. Look what we can do to Spain. we can do this to the rest of the countries. Millions of lives were lost because of that. And right now, Venezuela is in a very serious position. Not only the economic war against it, but already Biden, good old Biden, who was supposedly better than Trump, has already sent actual troops, more troops to Colombia. And there are terrible rumblings that are going on there. So those people who consider themselves progressive, who consider themselves socialist, who consider themselves on the side of the angels, had better support Venezuela, because they will be supporting themselves too.
Thank you, Maria. That's so true. Venezuela right now is a cornerstone in Latin America. I mean, we just had elections in Ecuador, in Peru, and we saw what happened in Ecuador with the Guillermo Lasso becoming victorious, right-wing neoliberal banker. And that spells danger, not just for the people of Ecuador, but for the people in Venezuela. Because what's the first thing that Lasso did? I'm sure you know this already, Maria. He came out and he attacked Venezuela.
Yes.
Right. And so this is dangerous, not just for individual nations of individual people, but this is dangerous for the whole region.
Yes.
Marco, would you like anything to add to that, or your take?
Oh yeah, I mean for sure. I mean Venezuela right now, it's as Maria said, this is, I think, the fate of Latin America. It's also being played in Venezuela. That's why, I mean, all the progressive forces of Latin America should stay with Venezuela, and to be honest, to also starting to go to anticipating a little bit of our second subject. I mean, China's been also critical for the defense of Venezuela, both China and Russia. I mean, without both countries, I don't know. Probably Venezuela at this point would be lost. It could potentially become another Libya, for instance, because I mean that's the only reason of why U.S. didn't invade Venezuela yet. We know is that because there's support from the whole continent, but also from two very strong countries that won't allow the U.S. to do that. So, I mean, thinking about the concept of imperialism, I think it's a very interesting thought you guys brought in terms of thinking about imperialism as the permanent stage of capitalism. And it's also interesting to see how also they were changing their tactics I mean throughout the years. So I think right now, I mean, with of course we still have, I mean, the classic imperialist forms of either conquista or invasion of countries and organizing the coups and military dictatorships, which forms we've been seeing from I mean colonial times for centuries, and then the 20th century was very marked with this more traditional military bourgeoisie, local bourgeoisie military coups and dictatorships. Now we have different forms in the last at least 10, 15 years, which many people call hybrid wars, but I mean there's other definitions. And this, I think, it's the stage that we've been living in many countries, and I would say Brazil, it's a big example of that. So Maria was talking about this Brazilian journalist Pepe Escobar right before we were still in the backstage. And he has an interesting thought about that. He said that probably what happened in Brazil was the most sophisticated hybrid war operation in that U.S. has ever realized, at least in the last decade, because what we saw in Brazil in the last years, since 2013, actually, when some mass mobilizations started legitimately raising many social claims in the country, but would turn it out to be co-opted or manipulated by the right wing. Then you have in 2016 the coup against the President Dilma, which is already fully demonstrated. There was a political. It was not. I mean, she didn't commit any crime, as it was stated at the moment at that point, but it was a political move from the right until the election of Bolsonaro in 2018. But what happened concretely? U.S. didn't use armies, didn't use generals. There's no dictatorship installed. There was no invasion whatsoever. But now we know that instead of the generals, instead of the military, the protagonists of the coup in Brazil were the judiciary, especially the judge, also called the Judge Moro, who were able to lead the so-called investigations and the trial against the former President Lula. It's already also documented. There was a major leak in one of the prosecutors' Telegram app last year that revealed how much this Judge Moro was working close together with the Department of Justice and the FBI, and how much this was related to the oil company of Brazil. Just for you guys to know, Brazil discovered the so-called the pre-salt, a huge reserve of oils a few years ago. That was still during Lula's government. And Brazil potentially could become the third biggest oil reserve in the world. By the way, we know first is Venezuela, and that's why the gringos are so interested on the country. But anyway, so that was the interests of the big multinational oil companies, plus the fact that Brazil were having, especially from a geopolitical point of view, was having a very independent policy, and it was becoming protagonist in Latin America, but also in the global South. And then this comes to the next point where we're going to discuss with more time, what was the role with Brazil in the BRICS together, especially with Russia and China. I mean, all this together was too much for the empire to take. So it's very much clear now how much the coup against Dilma and the trial against Lula, and the fact that Lula went to jail for almost 2 years and was excluded from the last elections in 2018, elections that he was supposed to win if he ran. So now it's clear how much this was a big hybrid war operation run by the US, and of course allied with the local ruling class in Brazil, that was also very, we could say, unsatisfied with some of the progressive policies that the Workers' Party were implementing during 13 years of government. So I think, and then you can see, I mean, there's another many, and China, this is exactly what's going on right now in China, all this fake news. This is also important element, how much the media and social media plays a huge role in these hybrid wars. And Brazil was the same. I mean, without social media, without the alignment with the whole big media, the traditional media in Brazil, spreading fake news like 24 hours a day, all this operation would never be possible. So I think very important for us also in terms of establishing the concept of imperialism, current concept nowadays, is to realize how much the methods of the empire also are changing and getting more sophisticated. Imagine if you don't need a general killing people, you need like social media and a judge to destroy a country and to destroy the left forces and to implement policies that are absolutely 100% aligned with the interests of the empire. I mean, there's a level of sophistication that we have to be aware of, because this is not going to stop. I mean, this now is China, I mean, and Venezuela and Brazil, and I mean, this going right now is happening on Ukraine. and the border with Russia. So that's for us as resistance against the empire. We have to be very aware that the tactics are going to be even more sophisticated in the next years. So we have to be prepared.
Thanks. And I think you bring up a lot of good points, a lot of questions I got, but I think I'll save it till later, particularly when we talk about Lula, who is actually considering running in the next presidential election.
Yeah.
First, before we get to that, I want to kind of touch on this idea of like green imperialism, environmental imperialism, something else you sort of touched on a little bit, because we sort of see this, and someone mentioned it in the comments real quick. Jacob mentioned this, how a lot of the U.S. New propaganda talking points, and we saw this especially with Bolivia, was using the environment. Well, this Evo, for example, in Bolivia, it was said Evo was destroying the rainforest, therefore he's got to go, right? And they do the same thing against all kinds of countries. They do the same thing in Venezuela to a different extent, though. They say, well, Maduro is oppressing these indigenous communities. He's got to go, right? It using these sorts of minor, or not, I want to say minor, but these sorts of things that are clearly not prioritized by the United States. In this instance, the environment. The United States doesn't care about the environment. Clearly, these things they don't care about, but they use them to push propaganda and imperialism against other countries. What are your thoughts, Maria and Marco? Anyone can jump in. Just what are your thoughts on that?
Venezuela has had everything thrown at it. Absolutely everything. One day I pick up the newspaper here in Canada and I read that people in Venezuela are eating dogs. The other day, another time, they were eating horses. Another time, things were so bad that Venezuelan mothers were abandoning their children on the side of highways. Now, I mean, they just invent and then they just throw it out of all the fake news. But it's such a travesty when they use things like human rights. Oh, Maduro is against human rights. Well, excuse me, this is the United States talking about human rights? How long have we got for us to talk about the violations of human rights in the United States against their own citizens, whether they're Black or Latino or whatever? The highest number of people in prisons, your number of poor, the number of people who haven't been allowed to vote, et cetera, et cetera. When they use words like humanitarian, we have to intervene for humanitarian purposes. This is nonsense. For humanitarian reasons, they bombed the hell out of Syria and Libya and everybody else. So this is just propaganda. But you know what has happened? People are wise to it now. When you cry wolf too many times, nobody is going to believe you except those who want to believe you. What Marco has brought up about the lawfare, which is what happened in Brazil, that use of the words like human rights and democracy, and this is a dictator, all of these words, they just twist them so that they can get power. That's all they want. Brazil is a cornucopia of riches. Venezuela, of course, the biggest amount of petroleum in the world, reserve in the world, and the second largest gold deposit. So they're just salivating at the mouth to get hold of our countries, right? And then, unfortunately, we have the elites, the murderous, treasonous upper classes of our countries, who their country is money. That is what their country is, and they are allied to those who are attacking us. So I think that we have reached a different level of fight, of how we fight imperialism. One of them, of course, is to fight this propaganda, this use of or abuse of these important words such as human rights and humanitarian aid and things like that. It is this hybrid war, which is a whole bunch of things. It's a media war. It's a diplomatic war. It's also a military war, by the way. In Venezuela, we just now had a sort of invasion of narco paramilitary people from Brazil. The United States isn't going to send their gringo soldiers to Venezuela. They're going to send the Colombians. What do they want? They want us, the brother nations, to kill each other off. Huh? Let's go to war with Brazil. Let's go to war with Colombia. Let them kill each other, and then we can be very nice, wash our hands. The United States did nothing. It's very evil. It really is very evil. But there's so much good stuff happening. Venezuela hasn't fallen. They've been telling us since year 2000 that Hugo Chavez became president. The country is collapsing. They have nowhere to go. This country is a disaster. Well, this is what they've been saying since the year, actually 1999, when President Chavez was there. And here we are. We haven't collapsed. And yes, the sanctions have hit us strongly, very strongly, and people are suffering a lot. But we've learned from Cuba, huh? We've learned to resist and how to resist. And as Chavez would say, aquí no se rinde nadie. Huh? Nobody is giving up. And we have found new ways of coping. And we could never have coped unless we had this solid base of socialism, of democratic socialism is what we have, a socialism that is Bolivarian. It's not a European thing that has been dropped upon us. No. This is a socialism that has grown out of our own identity, our own history, the communitarian life of our indigenous peoples, the ideology of Bolivar and Zamora and Sucre, of Robinson, of Andrés Bello. So Bolivarian socialism is completely different from any experience that may have happened in Europe. And this is the important thing. Venezuela hasn't collapsed because of the civic military union of the Bolivarian forces, because our army is also the people. It is not a Prussian sort of type of army that is separated from who the people are. And the people are not a mass. There's no mass of people in Venezuela. It's an organized people, el pueblo organizado. What we have are 50,000 communal councils. We have 3,000 communes. Just this week, they passed a law for the communal parliament to exist in Venezuela. These are the communes. The rural communes are the ones that have been feeding Venezuela. Venezuela can't buy food, can't buy medicine in the international market. All our accounts have been stolen by these pirate nations. The United States, England took our gold, Belgium, Portugal. These are all thieves that have stolen billions of money of Venezuela. And they don't allow us to have any kind of interaction internationally, yeah? And so how are we being fed? The communal councils in the rural areas and the city councils that are organizing the distribution of this in the cities. It has been that communitarian life that I can't explain to you. The volunteers. The volunteers are everywhere. We have the lowest incidence of pandemic in the region, and the reason is it isn't like the government is fantastic and it has this bureaucracy that can do everything. No, forget it. We're Venezuelans and we're very messy, but it is done because we have hundreds and thousands of volunteers. We have community health communities that go to the villages and the neighborhoods to try to train people to how they can keep healthy, all kinds of things. And so This is what has happened. Those countries that have I call it a socialist, but it's more than that. It's almost humanitarian that you can think of, like Cuba, like Venezuela, like Nicaragua, like, of course, China. Look at China. Look at Wuhan. Wuhan was a disaster. Everybody's going, oh, Wuhan, disaster. People are living quite happily in Wuhan right now. And all the rest of the countries have a third wave of horrendous pandemic. So these are the countries that have a sense, what I call the common good, and that they have a government that is prepared to sacrifice and to carry out this common good. We call it socialismo bolivariano in Venezuela, but it doesn't matter what we're going to call it. We know what we're talking about, don't we? And it has been Russia and China, as Marco said, who were the protectors of Venezuela. Both of them, Xi Jinping and Putin, who told the Americans, you lay off Venezuela or you're going to have problems with us. And they have been our protectors. And Cuba, well, Cuba is like our twin, okay? Cuba has been in Venezuela from the day one. Our whole health system has practically been designed by the Cubans. We've got Cuban doctors in every corner. They were the first to come to Venezuela to help us with the pandemic. So there's so much that's good, so much that we've learned. And Venezuela before used to import everything. Everything was imported. Now we're creating it, we're making it, and we're receiving many, many things that we really need from China and from Russia and from Iran and from Turkey, because these countries know what international solidarity is. And international solidarity is one of the keystones of every socialist theory that is out there. You pick up any book on socialism from wherever it is, and you will see that international socialism is a cornerstone of socialism everywhere. And by the way, that's not globalization.
Yeah, that was really well put, Maria. Thank you for that. And I just to add real quickly to that, one of the things that kind of amazed me the most when I went to, I spent a little while in Cuba, was the OSPAL organization, that organization of solidarity between Africa, Asia, and Latin America, and to be in that room where so many other revolutionaries from all over the world were. I mean, it was pretty amazing. It was pretty powerful. And that's exactly, everything you said, exactly right. That is what socialism is. It is that internationalism. Now, going to Marco, real quick, if you have anything to say on green imperialism, please, let us hear it. Also, though, I wanted to ask, and I wanted to throw this one question to you. Trying to transition now into this talk about China. What do you see if, like, let's say Lula runs for president? Where do you see that relationship between Brazil and China if Lula or someone like Lula were to become president in Brazil?
Well, that's a very good question, Nicholas, because I think now we are living a moment in Latin America that, despite of the defeat we had in Ecuador last week, there is a expectation that sort of like a new wave of progressive forces is coming back to the continent. We had Argentina. We won the election in Argentina and also in Bolivia. We have Mexico is still, a little bit ambiguous, but maybe in a wave they would be also brought. And of course, next year, Brazil election will play a huge role. And of course, could be Cuba and Venezuela. They're just waiting for us, guys. Come on, you guys have to do some homework because we are suffering. We need you guys. So first thing in general, I would say one thing that is would be like a very important geopolitical issue in the next year or so is what's going to be the relationship between the progressive forces in Latin America and China. Because if you think about the less progressive wave, they call it like pink tide in English. We don't use this in Latin America, but just for to be clear, happened in the 2000s. And I mean, China still had a very different position in the geopolitical stage, and especially was not wanting to get into trouble with the US. So, of course, the relationship between China and Latin America was, I mean, of course, investments, a lot of trade, and even you can say they had the BRICS, they started to build the BRICS, but was not a so assertive relationship. But what we're seeing now, of course, everything changed, especially in the last year, and with this so-called new Cold War that U.S. is imposing on China. Of course, China is hitting back, and has maybe not is not attached to trying to sustain a good relationship with the U.S. Regarding Latin America. So that's, I think, it's the first thing, is the main question is what's going to be the so-called the next pink tide, with China having a more assertive role in the geopolitical stage. And of course, I mean, if Lula wins, I mean, we're sure that the relationship with China would be very different. I mean, just for you to know, I mean, Lula has been saying this. I mean, not in public, but he says this for some friends. He first thing he wants to do when he can travel internationally is to come to China. He really wants to come to China because he knows the role that China is playing right now, and the importance that China can have in the whole Latin America. So for sure, the things are going to change if Lula or some left candidate win. But it's also interesting to see what China is already doing in the region, especially right now with Venezuela, of course, as Maria has also remember, but Bolivia. Remember the coup against Evo in 2019 is absolutely related to the increase of relationship, of quality of relationship between China and Bolivia, especially regarding the lithium, which there was already agreements between China and Bolivia, not only to Bolivia to export the lithium as raw material, as you might know, lithium is, I mean, we don't have cell phones and all electronics without lithium from the batteries. So it's an absolutely strategic natural resource for the capitalism right now. So there was an agreement already to start to process the lithium in Bolivia, which is something that would be very important for the country economically, and the coup is related to that. I mean, it's not by chance that Elon Musk from Tesla made that like, oh, there was a joke, but we know that was not a joke. That was like, yes, we're gonna do coups, we're gonna overthrow every president who is on our way. So that was one thing, and also what's happening now with Argentina. China and Argentina are I mean, if you get the last year, the number of agreements and projects that China will be funding. For instance, in December, they just they signed a deal for to reconstruct the railways from all the way from Buenos Aires to the west of the country to get to Chile and the Pacific. It's going to be investment of almost $5 billion US that Chinese companies would do the work, and China is funding for financing for Argentina. And there's many other agreements in solar energy, and of course in trade, etc. So it's very exciting to see how much China is approaching Latin America more and more, and we hope that this will continue and even increase if a progressive leftist candidate win the election next year in Brazil.
Yeah, that's amazing. I didn't know about the funding of the railway between Argentina and Chile by China. But it's projects like that I think we really want to highlight, especially when it talks about building up the development of Latin America, as opposed to the exploitation that's done by the United States, the United Kingdom, Canada, and all those other Western imperialist states. So now I guess we can move into more specific details now about China and specific cases in specific countries. We can start with Maria. You know a lot about Venezuela, so I guess we start with that relationship between China and Venezuela and how that has aided or developed Venezuela. You kind of touched on that already, some of the defenses that China and Russia have provided to Venezuela. But if you want to go further into detail about that, please.
Well, I would. It's a most extraordinary relationship, Venezuela and China. Venezuelans are absolutely in awe that this country is so far away from us on the other side of the world, that we don't speak the same language, we don't have the same culture, we have different political systems, and yet this country has come to save us in this terrible moment that we are in. I can't tell you how grateful Venezuelans are. But it all started, well, in the year 2000. China started investing in Venezuela. There were small investments, but there were investments in the year 2000. But in 2018, China approved an action plan with CELAC. CELAC is the regional bloc of the Latin American and Caribbean nations without the United States or Canada. Okay, and that the first country to receive medical aid following this plan of CELAC was Venezuela. When? Mark the date, the 19th of March, 2020. In March 2020 was when the world was told that there was a pandemic. Well, for Venezuela, this was terrible because we had no supplies and medicine and everything. So Maduro swallowed his pride and asked the IMF for $5 billion. Now, according to the IMF's rules, Venezuela had all the right to ask for a loan. Well, they said, sorry, you aren't going to get the $5 billion. And the $5 billion was only exclusively for medical support. So the IMF said, the hell with it, you all die in the pandemic. And so what happened? We received medical aid from China. The second donation from China came with 500,000 test kits and 70,000 infrared thermometers, as well as the arrival of the Chinese medical experts from Wuhan. They came to Venezuela to tell the Venezuelan top medical people who were advising the government what they had to do. This was amazing. This was the first country that the doctors from Wuhan went to Venezuela. Then, since May of last year, an air bridge was established between Venezuela and Beijing, and it has brought to Venezuela already 2,000 tons of medical aid from China. On March, this March, Venezuela received the donation of 500,000 dosage of the Chinese vaccine called Verocell, along with 17 tons of medical supplies and equipment. And this is produced by the Sinopharm private Chinese company. The Chinese vaccine has an advantage over the Sputnik vaccine because it doesn't need such a high, refrigeration, and it's very efficient against the variants. And on April 15th, a couple of days ago, the 11th flight from China arrived in Venezuela with 300 tons of humanitarian aid. The vice president of Venezuela, Delcy Rodriguez, was there to receive the plane, and she said that China has extended its hand in friendship with these donations at our most dire hour of need. These are all donations, by the way. China isn't asking for anything behind. You know, Venezuela can't buy food, can't buy medicine in the international market. Its international accounts have been stolen, and she can't do any financial transactions because of the criminal, illegal, unilateral, coercive measures of the United States and its allies, including its lackey, Canada. And China, as Marco has said, has helped many Latin American countries, Argentina, Ecuador, Chile, Mexico, among others. But here's something really interesting. It's not only the Chinese government that has given humanitarian aid to Venezuela, but also private Chinese companies. There's a man called Jack Ma, who is one of the richest men in China. He has donated medical equipment to 24 countries of Latin America, and it includes a donation of 2 million masks, surgical masks. Now, this is a result of the state-owned enterprises in China, along with the private Chinese companies that they have. They have this together. They've helped build hospitals, manufactured medical supplies, and coordinated. This is very important. Coordinated food supplies during the pandemic. What has the USA done? What has Canada done? What has the great European Union done? Nothing. Okay. Nothing. They're out there fighting with each other, each one pulling for to having the most vaccines for themselves. Now, there's another thing I have to talk about. I can't stop there. I have to talk about Chinese investment. Now, Chinese investment has two amazing characteristics. One, it comes with no political demands. So Xi Jinping is not there telling Maduro, I'm going to give you 5 million, but then you have to do this and you have to do that, and you have to govern this way or that. Nothing. The most amazing respect for the sovereignty and the democratic life of Venezuela. The second characteristic of the Chinese investment is that it comes with transfer of technology. It comes with a transfer of know-how. Believe me, after decades and decades of the United States running, the country of Venezuela, we got no know-how from the Americans, none. And the Chinese are there. Okay, they open a factory to build bicycles, but they're teaching the people there how to do this. And there's no question of the patent. Oh, this is the Chinese bike and you can't use it because this, that, the other. None of that. It really is part of the whole package. China is now Venezuela's largest creditor, and China has financed projects in mining, in energy, in infrastructure. I just remind you, Venezuela cannot get any of this from anybody else unless it's China or Russia or help from Cuba. And the Chinese products that are exported to Venezuela include chemical products, medical and surgical goods, industrial electrical equipment, iron and steel goods, and textiles and manufacturing goods also, and vehicles. In 2018, President Maduro went to Beijing. This is amazing. The president of Venezuela went to China and spoke with Xi Jinping in Beijing and signed 20 bilateral agreements and obtained the 5 billion loan that the International Monetary Fund wouldn't give Venezuela. In 2019, this is quite recently, China signed 28 more corporate agreements with Venezuela. And this in the petroleum area, which helped Venezuela triple the petroleum output in the last 6 months. So the Chinese investment is worth many billions of dollars. In gold, 13 million, in petroleum, about 600 million. I could go on, automobile, I could tell you all the billions of this. But it's very important for me to end by saying that China, Russia, Cuba, Iran, and Turkey have all demonstrated true international solidarity. They've helped Venezuela, that has been criminally and inhumanely attacked by the United States and its allies, and with no let up during the horrendous pandemic. The Pope Francis, has asked that sanctions be lifted against countries, and Biden's a great Catholic, huh? He's not listening to the Pope. The World Health Organization director has warned that this is a catastrophic moral failure of the rich and powerful countries of the world, because 130 countries don't have vaccines, and heaven knows when they're going to get it. These capitalist countries are fighting amongst themselves. They're practicing vaccine imperialism. This is a new one, right? Vaccine imperialism, where they're not only not sharing the vaccine, not donating the vaccine, not selling the vaccine, but they're putting barriers so that they can protect their intellectual property, so that the patent for the vaccines are theirs and theirs alone. They're refusing to waiver the international property that would allow countries to manufacture the vaccines. And let me tell you, all the companies of the major companies, Moderna, Pfizer, Johnson & Johnson, AstraZeneca, almost all of them got the money for their research and for the implementation from the public, state money. The least would be 67%, some of them 100%. Whose money is this? This is the people's money. This is the state money. And guess what? They all are allowed to keep the profits. So they're selling these vaccines and keeping the profit. This is total moral failure. And China is a golden example of international solidarity. It rapidly alerted the country, the world, what was happening in Wuhan. It rapidly sequenced that viral genome, and he shared it with the world. It sent medical delegations to dozens of countries to tell them how to cope with this. And it was the first country in the world to commit to making the vaccine a global public good. Cuba has developed a vaccine called, I can't remember the name, Ayala. And guess what? They're going to produce it in Venezuela. Cuba and Venezuela are going to start producing vaccines, and they're not going to be charging people over it, So I have to say also that Russia, on February 15th, gave Venezuela 100,000 doses of the Sputnik vaccine. On April 15th, it sent a further 50,000 doses, plus 1 million doses of the antiviral Favipiravir. And the Sputnik doses vaccine is also 95% efficient. It's already gone to our frontline workers. And the Cuban doctors, well, God bless them, they have been there from the very first. So the people of Venezuela are immensely grateful to the noble and humanitarian people of China, who have showed so much friendship and care to a country such as Venezuela on the other side of the world, which it shares very little. And the other thing I have to say about prejudice, it's hard for me as a sociologist to make such a large generalization, but I will tell you that we are not used to having prejudice against the Chinese. On the contrary, when a man wants to please a girl and call her honey, in Venezuela they call her mi chinita. And indeed, there is a Virgin Mary, a figure of the Virgin Mary called La Virgen de Chiquinquirá, and she is always called La Chinita. So in Venezuela, we don't have a history in our culture of going against China. And I guess China's been so far away, that people have never felt any kind of animosity towards them. And towards Russia, we haven't had any either. On the contrary, Russia has been such a good neighbor, such a good friend in so many ways, and especially that China along with Russia, these are big, powerful countries. They are the ones who stopped the Americans from invading us. To that, our historians will never forget that.
Thank you, Maria. And those were a lot of like very important facts that really laid out what this solidarity looks like in practice, right? Instead of this abstract way of thinking about it, or just words or rhetoric. These are actual actions that are being done to change the lives of Venezuelans, done by China, done by Russia and Cuba. And so thank you for that. And I also, one of the things that really stuck out to me was it reminded me of a quote by African revolutionary Thomas Sankara, where he talks about what we need is not food or clothing. What we need is the machines, the machines that are needed to actually produce our own food and develop ourselves. And that's what we see China is doing for nations like Venezuela, for nations like Bolivia, for Cuba. It's helping develop these nations, you know. So I think that was very, very, very well put.
Can I just say one thing?
Yeah, of course.
Venezuela was not allowed to be industrialized. Venezuela was to be the producer of petroleum. That was its role. Anything else was practically forbidden or not allowed. We didn't have agriculture. Our agriculture was pitiful. We've had to learn agriculture, and we learned agriculture a lot from Cuba and Nicaragua. Industrialized. And you know what the word would be? You don't need that. You don't need any of that. You've got petroleum. You can buy it. This is a big mistake. And now in the pandemic, even Canada has realized how dependent it is, how it has many things that it cannot get now because it deindustrialized itself and depended on, we can buy it. Yes, our great friends in the world, the globalization. There are no friends in globalization, okay? No friends, only interests.
Exactly. That's exactly right. Marco, I guess we want to move to Brazil and that relationship between China and Brazil, how that's developed, what that looks like today, what that might look like in the future. I think you're on mute, Marco.
Well, unfortunately, our relationship is by far not as good as the Chinese-Venezuelan relationship because, of course, we have a extreme right-wing, proto-fascist president government right now. So actually, this is probably the worst ever relationship that Brazil had with China probably ever, but in many decades for sure. Despite of like in the last 2 months, there was a little bit of improvement, but that was just because of what's going on in the country right now. I mean, the level of tragedy we're living. Brazil is the worst situation of the pandemic in the planet right now. We've been, having more than 100,000 new cases a day, and more than 5,000 people are dying every day in my country because of the pandemic. But not only because of the irresponsible lack of measures, and actually it's not a lack of measure because the government has been doing a lot, but actually a lot to worsen the situation, boycotting every measures from lockdowns even to vaccines. Until two months ago, the president were doing campaign against vaccine. That's the level of the tragedy we've been living. So because of that, and because Brazil now depends heavily on Chinese vaccines, not only actually Chinese vaccines, because, Brazil has right now 2 vaccines. It's Sinovac from China and AstraZeneca from Sweden, UK. But guess what? The raw materials for to produce the vaccines, all of them come from China. Even the AstraZeneca ones are actually manufactured in China and exported to Brazil. So because of that, because of the dependence that Brazil has right now with China, this responsible president we have decided to tone down the criticism against China. But that was like the last 2 years was only like a very disrespectful and irresponsible relationship and attitude towards China. I mean, even in the campaign, Bolsonaro, for instance, he visited Taiwan when he was doing a campaign. That was, of course, for China, this is like a huge disrespect regarding national sovereignty. Bolsonaro was following the same path of Trump, spreading fake news about China, blaming China for the pandemic, saying this is like coronavirus, that this was a plot of the Communist Party to destroy the world, and blah 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 blah. And the situation got to a point that even the Chinese ambassador reacted very strongly, like 2-3 months ago, and the whole last year. So the situation and politically is really bad. And at the other side, there's a huge trade, of course, between Brazil and China. So China is right now the biggest trading partner of Brazil. I mean, the same with like tens of countries in the world. But just to have a quick example, so in last year, in 2020, Brazil had a trade surplus with China of 35 billion US dollars. That was 70% of the whole surplus that Brazil had in trade last year. This is 10 times higher than in 2010 in terms of the relationship, trade relationship. And 1/3 of the exports from Brazil went to China. So that's the level of importance and that China has today to Brazil. But you know what? There is one problem, structural problem for Brazil, because most of this trade is of primary products. So it's basically soy, oil, beef, and iron ore. This is what Brazil is exporting to China now. There are some investments, of course, related to infrastructure, but especially in the last years, since the coup in 2016, the relationship got very different and is much more focused now on the commodity exports. So, of course, for Brazil, this is not the best situation, the best case, because at this point, Brazil could have much more interesting agreements with China, like Bolivia is doing, like Argentina is doing. But of course, unfortunately, because of the bad politics of our government, Brazilian government doesn't see China as a ally. Is actually the opposite. Until 2 months ago, China was considered as an enemy because Brazil has a very subservient politics towards U.S. and was absolutely 100% aligned with U.S. policies towards China. So this is the situation right now. It's actually it's curious because Brazil is living a similar or a potential similar problem as Australia, which is also depend heavily on Chinese imports or exports to China. But as we know, in the last year, Australia also picked side and is also following subserviently the U.S. and UK policies against China, and is now suffering because, of course, China is not going to not react to that. But the thing is that there is a huge potential in this relationship, as we were talking before, but then we need a new government in the country. And also you have this right now in the next 2 months, there's another very important decision in Brazil regarding the 5G, which, by the way, the president until 2 months ago was also saying that would exclude Huawei from the auction for the 5G, the implementation of 5G in Brazil. the same as US did, as UK did, and a few other countries, Sweden, in terms of excluding China with this stupid alleged, these allegations that, this Huawei is spying for the Chinese government, when we know that Huawei made already like tens of international tests, and it's absolutely was absolutely approved. And just like 1 month or 2 months ago, we had Germany approving the use of Huawei in the country. And of course, Germany has a very strong experience of being hacked by other countries, because US was actually hacking Germany. It was hacking even personal devices of Prime Minister Angela Merkel, as we could see in the revelations of the former NSA agent Edward Snowden. So Germany knows how to detect after this experience if they're being hacked, spied, or not. And they definitely know that the Chinese are not doing that. The Huawei is not doing that. So this is also because of the vaccine. So the Brazilian president, he sort of toned down its criticism against China, and it's now even accepting Huawei to participate in the competition for implementation of 5G in the country. But that's the problem. The problem we have with that, we are stuck with this proto-fascist government, which is responsible for the tragedy we're living right now in the country. At this point is 350,000 people died, or even more, because it's hard to follow. But the relationship are not good, and so that's the situation right now. So I can only envy Maria and the Venezuelans, because of this great relationship that Venezuela and China are developing. But now, we need to do our homework, and next year go back to power, and then be able to recreate this a good relationship with China, and also the BRICS, because of that, actually, since the coup in Dilma, against Dilma in 2016, that Brazil was getting more and more distant from BRICS, and it's clear the importance that BRICS could have at this point in the geopolitical situation we're living, because this would be a stronger alternative to the U.S. Unilateralism and arbitrary sanctions and arbitrary attacks against the countries of the global South. So that's the situation now.
Thanks for that. And yeah, it's interesting to see. It's very clear the divisions in Latin America, the divisions of the global world. I guess you call it superpowers nowadays, right? Or competing superpowers, although they have very different interests. How that affects all of the nations throughout the world in terms of dividing them up. We have, I think it was Maria who said that, they want to make us fight against each other. Well, this is how they start. You have to pick a side, right? You're forced to pick a side. Do you pick the right-wing side alongside the US and the UK imperialist, or do you pick the progressive side with Russia and China, who are undermining that US hegemony around the world? And so now we have a question from one of the student organizers who put this together, and it's a really good question. It's about dispelling some of the myths against China. So they ask, we often hear the persistent imperialist myths that China is engaging in colonialism or in the form of colonial resource extraction in Latin America. What have the benefits of China and Latin American solidarity been for indigenous peoples in Latin America? Could this help? And how could this help people understand the centrality of national self-determination and internationalism and the internationalist struggle?
Well, do you want me to say something here?
Yeah, sure. You can.
Well, in Venezuela, we are very conscious of anything that smacks of colonialism. I want to first talk about the indigenous peoples of Venezuela. The indigenous peoples of Venezuela are alive and visible and very important and very active in everything that happens. When you open our Constitution, the first page, you see the indigenous people there. I have seen the Constitution. It was a little book translated into the languages of our indigenous peoples. In the municipal counties where there are no indigenous, there are always 3 seats for indigenous peoples in every municipal county. And if there are no indigenous peoples in that area, the municipal county has 3 empty chairs where they would be if they were there. This is how really important the indigenous peoples are in Venezuela. So the state of Venezuela is not in a relationship of colonialism towards its own people. The minister for indigenous peoples is an indigenous person. So the indigenous peoples now, when they want something or when they're hurting for something or other, they'll march down the street and they'll say to the government, hold on a second, we want this, or you're not doing that, or you're not doing the other. I had a friend who said, oh, things must be very bad in Venezuela because I saw this protest march of the indigenous people. I said, this is fantastic. In the past, indigenous peoples who walk down the street, they'd be hit with machetes and told to go back home. They have the support and the confidence that they can also criticize the government, say, you're not doing this well, you're not doing that well. Now, it's funny that they should link that to extractism and colonialism with respect to China. First of all, I want to say something about the word extractism. Extracting ores from the earth has got to be the oldest industry in humanity. Just think of the Paleolithical axes, which I have seen, you know, where the primitive man would make axes out of stones. We have a whole era of history called the Iron Age, called the Bronze Age. I mean, we need the substance of the earth for our living. It is true. So extractivism in itself is not a bad thing. What is bad is how you extract it. So if you are extracting, you don't care a darn about what you're doing to the environment or to the human rights of the people who live there. If you are extracting and cutting down forests and polluting rivers and doing all this kind of thing, well, that is bad, and that is how an extraction is occurring. That is most important. It's also important when you look at extractism is who gets what. So is this carried out by a foreign company? And is this company paying very little tax? Is this company taking all the profits? I mean, these are, as they say, the devil is in the details. So those are the specific things that you really have to look at when people talk about extractism. Now, the one thing that's really important is also to think that Venezuela is in a very poor situation. It needs to have something to feed its people. So we have petroleum and we have gold. So we do extract those things. Now, in terms of climate change, the best thing would be for that petroleum to stay in the ground. And that is, it's 2 and 2 is 4. But what do the poor countries say? And Correa almost got it. He said, I'll keep the petroleum of Ecuador in the ground if the rich countries pay us to do that. Do you know what has been happening with the extraction in Latin America? That all that they've extracted from all our countries has gone to their development. It's gone to their consumer society. It's gone to their big buildings and cars and consume, not our development. So we in Latin America, I'm including all of our countries, we need to develop. We need to have more growth, and we have to have more infrastructure. We have to have things to make our people live not in enormous luxury like in North America and Europe, but to live well, vivir bien, as the Bolivians say. And to do that, if we do any extraction, it should be for our not economic growth, but human development, which is not just to grow. And so China has come into Venezuela not as a colonial power. First of all, it can't, because it's dealing with a very revolutionary government. And the revolutionary government of Venezuela, that wasn't born yesterday. Huh? It wasn't born yesterday. So we're not about to give out, contracts left, right, and center like they used to give to the United States. Oh, yeah, come in, take it all. So no, this is a revolutionary socialist Bolivarian government that knows very well how to negotiate. But at the same time, I have to admit, the Chinese have not come to Venezuela to tell us what to do. And this is really a new type of commercial, I would say, exchange, where even though we're tiny and we can't compare to the huge giant that is China. China is treating Venezuela like a partner should. So I have looked at this very carefully, all of this that has happened in Venezuela, and I would say that no, I don't see colonialism because we have got commercial relationships with China. And the last thing I want to say is the government of Maduro has entered into negotiations with the private sector of Venezuela. The Constitution of Venezuela says that we are a mixed society, a mixed economy, which means there is a role for the private company, not in the large productions, petroleum and large industries. All that belongs to the government, but there are different types of property. Some people on the left have criticized Maduro. And what they don't understand is that you negotiate with those who don't think like you. You don't negotiate with your friends. You don't negotiate with the people who believe exactly like you. You've got to negotiate with those who are against you. Why? Because what's the alternative? You're going to kill them? You're going to go to war with them all? We either negotiate and negotiate well, or it will be, civil war. The other thing I have to say is about this business of commercial relationships is that it's all in the details of how you are doing this. And with Maduro and the private sector in Venezuela, Maduro has a huge advantage. One, he won a landslide in the parliament. Okay, so he is negotiating from a position of strength. And second of all, they are all divided. Mr. Guaido, Guaido is a political corpse. Okay, he is hated even by the opposition. So the opposition, the extreme opposition, is really in a very bad way. But there are these moderate opposition people who took part in the elections and won elections, places in parliament. And Maduro can work with these people because these moderate people in opposition aren't trying to overthrow the government. They're trying to coexist with the government, and that is also good. So I end up by saying about China, I want to repeat, they have treated us with respect. They haven't told Maduro how he should conduct his country. And second of all, there has been enormous amount of technology transfer with China. And this isn't something that's happened just now. This also happened with Cuba. When I was in Cuba, I saw an entire beautiful campus. It was a lovely school, great big lovely school. You know what it was? This was a school exclusively for Chinese people to come to Cuba and learn Spanish. And one of the things that flabbergasted the Venezuelans was when the ambassador of China was on stage before the cameras and said his speech in perfect Spanish. It's a small thing, but it's a big thing.
Thanks. Thank you, Maria. I'll ask Marco the same question. How do you respond to people who make that argument of Chinese colonialism in Latin America, and like resource extraction, and that idea that what's going on is similar to what we've seen with the United States or with Europe?
Well, I think Maria already gave like a very good lecture on that, so I think I'm not gonna repeat. But the thing is that this is not only Latin America, this is in the whole world. This, I mean, especially Africa. I mean, China's it's even much more accused in Africa to be like either a colonial or new imperialist power, which is absolutely wrong. First of all, because of the kind of relationship that China establishes with the countries. I mean, just tell me how many countries China invaded, how many coups China organized. I mean, this is ridiculous. It's just like is an argument that doesn't resist you like 3-4 questions. So, and second, I mean, how many stories we can tell here about how China negotiate with the terms of the negotiations with the countries. I mean, from Africa to even Europe. I mean, you have this in YouTube. You can, for instance, see the former minister of Greece, Minister of Finance of Greece, Yanis Varoufakis, telling his experience. And he's not like a huge fan of China. He's like, China should be democratic, etc. Should have elections. But even him say, yeah. I mean, when I went to the cabinet in Greece, we had like a terrible negotiations with actually it was a private Chinese. I don't remember if it was private actually or SOE, but it was a Chinese company who was running the port. But it was not a good terms, but because of the former government of Greece, because of course, I mean, China is dealing with negotiations like hundreds of countries, tens of countries. So also depend of the agency of the countries how to get the good terms. So he said that, but then we complain with them, say, I mean, we can't do like that. This is not good for the countries, not good for the workers. So we have to renegotiate that. And Chinese said, okay, let's renegotiate. So there's like tens of hundreds of examples we could give. But I think in case of Latin America, coming back to our continent, I think the example of Bolivia is the most important one of what kind of relationship China was already developing with Bolivian government before the coup, and is doing right now in terms of the lithium and even like satellites, because I mean China has just launched one satellite in cooperation with Bolivia. Was going to be the first satellite of Bolivia, and did this without many other countries in Africa as well. So the thing is that if the countries have a strategy, have a plan in terms of, for instance, request transfer of technology, request good terms of the trade from primary products, commodities to industrial goods. I mean, China is always willing to do that. But it's true, China needs tons, millions of tons of natural resources. I mean, of course, this is how you can have such a huge industrial economy without natural resources. As Maria said, I mean, we need natural resources. The thing is that how we're going to do that. This is a major challenge that we have, and we are not doing well. Actually, most of the cases in all the countries in the world, we're not doing well regarding the balance between the development and environment. And for instance, also Maria said, oh, it depends of if these resources are also good for the country, or if they're just going to the imperial powers. This is our story in Latin America. I mean, even the case of oil, I was telling you, uh, in a little bit before, a couple of years before the coup in 2016, the Congress in Brazil voted a project that was proposed by the government, by Dilma government, um, in terms of using the resources, the royalties that the state received from the oil company, which is a state-run oil company, the Petrobras. They they proposed this, that all the royalties, which is tens of billions of dollars every year, would be used 75% for public education, 25% for public health system. That was the deal. And of course, this was actually the first law that was broken by the president, President Temer, who actually succeeded and overthrown Dilma. So this is like a clear example of what kind of interests you have in these situations, and how much like a good policy of using the resources from extractivism, from extract to the country, can be good for people or not. And of course, right now in Brazil, we don't have a government that is looking for this kind of deals that are good for the people. So I think it's case of China. I think there's many other examples. We don't have so much time here of deals that are. I mean, even Iran right now, they just signed a deal with Iran for 25 years. We don't know. I mean, they didn't disclose still all the details, but there are rumors that might be $400 billion for 25 years. It's mostly oil, Iranian oil going to China, and Iran getting infrastructure, roads, ports, railways, even technology, 5G, transfer of technology, and many other kinds of technology, also medical and even military, because Iran has to defend themselves from the empire. So it's clear that the terms of the negotiations from the global countries of the global South with China has a huge potential in the next years to be beneficial to our peoples, and at the same time, of course, fulfilling the needs that China has, huge needs that China has for natural resources. Because China is not only, I mean, even during the pandemic, China, for instance, had to increase the use of energy, but like massively increase. But why? Because most of the countries in the world, they are just stuck with the pandemic, and all the industry or part of the industry is just stopped. They can't produce. China is had to produce much more in the last year of industrial goods to the whole world. So of course it's more energy, and it's more energy. It can be potentially more harmful to the environment. But that's the balance that we have to. This is a challenge we have. But for sure, in capitalism, that's never going to be a challenge, because they don't care about that. They just destroy the environment, as we know. That, I mean, our planet is being destroyed, and we don't have like a good expectation from the next 20, 30 years, and because we know capitalism is not about people, it's not about nature, it's about profit, independently of the results. And the results are being very bad until now. So that's a contradiction that we're not going to solve for sure in the capitalist system. But with, I mean, progressive governments allied with China, for instance, we have the possibility to get to a better terms. Even because, I mean, there's another story. I'm not going to open this window here. Is the sound from here? No, I mean,
I don't know. It's not my sound. Oh, it's gone.
Yeah. That's all right.
This is another thing. I mean, if you take the, I just announced that, maybe somebody can make a question, but Chinese policies to environment in the last year, especially during the president of the government of President Xi, China's, I mean, has been doing like huge efforts to change the environment. We know how much China harmed the environment with their like a super fast industrial development in the last 30, 40 years. But they are doing like huge effort to overcome that. Just one example, in since 2000 to until today, 25% of the reforestation in the world, new green areas that were created, 25% were done in China. And this is actually a data from the NASA, from the satellites of NASA. So there's no suspicions of communist propaganda on that. So that's the kind of things that China is doing. But of course, this is not going to be the main concerns of the huge multinational companies in the whole world. So this is the kind of challenge that humanity has to deal with in the next decades.
Yeah, Maria. Yeah.
One example of how the investment of China is not colonialism is the satellites. It was amazing for Venezuela to have not one but 3 satellites up in the air. These were so important for our communication, so important for our environment, because with the satellites we could see what was happening in the land. So important for our defense. We never had any kind of that type of communication. Well, it was Chinese technology and their rockets which put these satellites up in the air. Well, several hundred Venezuelan young men and women went to China to learn about this technology of satellite technology. So they spent time in China. It is true that they go up with the Chinese satellites and with the Chinese rockets, but guess who controls them all? Those Venezuelans who were taught in China how to work these satellites. So they are all fully being controlled or operated by Venezuelans who were taught the know-how. This was transfer of technology. And I ask you, for all the number of decades since 1900 that the United States has been in Venezuela, what kind of technology did we get from them? They had the NASA. How many Venezuelans were asked to go to NASA and learn anything? Or did NASA help us with any kind of satellite? Nothing, nothing. So that is another reason why Venezuelans truly do appreciate the Chinese help, investment, and their humanitarian help also.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great example. It really makes me think, especially when you consider the ideas of imperialism and underdevelopment. What could our people achieve if there was solidarity with nations like China? What could we achieve if more of us were working and gaining this technology from places like Russia and China, rather than being exploited and extracted and enriching those U.S. capitalists, UK capitalists, Canadian capitalists? That's something that is beautiful to dream about, but it's something we got to work towards, right? That's the goal for the future. But I think I want to close it out now, and I want to thank y'all both so much. I'll give you all a chance to give like a little closing statements. Just kind of speak up to maybe some of your work, or if you want to promote some resources or educational topics or videos that people can go towards to learn more. For me personally, I felt like I should have gotten my notebook out. I felt like I was in one of Maria's classes. Should have been taking notes and learning. This was a great talk. So thank y'all so much, and thank you to GERG and all the students at Winnipeg who put this together. This is such an important topic, especially given all the things that are going on now. We have a Cold War ramping up against against China, started by the U.S., started by the EU, and this is this seriously endangers and threatens the lives not just of the US population, not just of the Chinese population, but of the whole world. We've seen how this kind of stuff divides our people and divides our countries. Where do these wars play out? They don't play out in the States, they don't play out in the EU, they play out in Latin America, they play out in Africa and in Asia. So it's our people who are threatened by this if we don't actually start working in solidarity. So I'll let Maria go. Any closing statements, resources, or anything you'd like to promote?
Well, I'd like to promote peace. Peace is the most important thing. Nothing in human endeavor works unless we have peace, and we have to work strongly for peace. Why should we be enemies? Why should we hate some other people? Why can't we get along? And one of the things that I always think about peace is that it goes hand in hand with justice. Yes, that's true. But we have to look behind what is there in the news, what is behind what these politicians are telling us, because peace is too important to leave to the politicians, much too important. We have to stop the hate at some point. We have to, for example, what on earth has Venezuela done to the United States? What harm has Venezuela ever done to the US citizens? What harm is there?
Big harm. Venezuela is promoting socialism.
Yeah,
that's
true.
Harm from the empire.
That's true. We're the bad example. But why are we the bad example when in fact we are the good example? This is what's called international solidarity. This is what international solidarity does. It builds us up so that we can have peace, so that we can cooperate with each other. And we have to reject all those words of war and those words of hateful things. And it starts with all of us, really. And I just hope that, that we will see the end of this absolutely ridiculous and stupid Cold War that is starting now, and that is detrimental. We have so many big things. We have climate change to deal with. We've got an enormous inequality within countries and between countries. And we can't even cope with the pandemic. Because we're fighting with the pandemic. Heaven knows when the waters rise because of the melting of the glaciers, what we're going to do. We have to start now with this international cooperation and solidarity, because we will not be able to deal with the big things that are coming to us in the future. So peace, my friends. Thank you very much for this opportunity. And it was a joy to meet Nicolas and Marco.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Maria. That's such an important message to end on. So thank you so much for that. It is true. We need this solidarity for peace, because that's what we're working towards, regardless of what other people may think or try to claim. Marco, any closing comments, thoughts?
Well, thank you very much for this invitation. It's really a pleasure to meet you both, and especially I have my notes here. All this information about China-Venezuela solidarity cooperation. So thanks for the lecture. Learned a lot. And I wanted, in talking about China, just wanted to share with you. I'm sending, I think, to the chat right now, which is like a digest of news that we do every week. It's called News on China. It's a very humble project. We have a few friends working together. It's just like a couple of hours a week. Most of them is just like assembling news from China of the week. But basically was an attempt to we try to bring this to, especially to our audiences in Latin America and Africa. We have like a big network of movements that work together, and we're very worried about, I mean, the whole increase of fake news against China that's just actually just increased by the hour. So even like very progressive media outlets from Latin America, they are reproducing the bullshit coming from BBC, from New York Times, because I mean it's crazy because they know the U.S. lie about everything, but about China, oh, that might be true. So this is that's why we started this project. I mean, we don't use the sources we use is, I mean, big media outlets from the region, even some Western ones sometimes we use, but it's just like a way to have a sense of what's going on in the country every week. We also have a YouTube channel where we post, like, we have like very short videos every week about 4 of the stories, and I'm also sending to you now. Yeah, the YouTube channel where we also post like almost weekly show we do. It's me and Tings Check. She's also from Tricontinental. So we do with Daniel Dumbro, which is this vlog that is Canadian but Guyanese origin and is based in China. So we also have almost weekly conversations about some of the news of the week. So this is my tip if you want to do more about China and follow the development of this fascinating society. And thank you again, and I hope you can meet sometime else.
Definitely. Thanks so much. Thanks so much to our speakers. Thanks so much to everyone in the chat and in who's been watching this through and who's going to watch this later. I hope everyone has a good weekend. Enjoys their weekend. Enjoys the day. I know Marco's in Shanghai, so he's just starting his day. But enjoy it. Thanks everyone for joining us, and I'll end now.